journalists had the idea that they wanted to reach audiences about women and girls issues, and they wanted a game. They didn't know anything about games. That's why they came to Games for Change. Once they explained to us this mandate for reaching as wide an audience of the unconverted around this issue as possible, that's how we chose the Facebook platform for this game. And the goal really from the outset has been to reach millions of people. The game launched on March 4. We're now at 700,000.
But you started as a filmmaker, so switching from being a filmmaker to using the platform of games, how did that come about, and why did you do that?
Well, I was never a filmmaker. I supported filmmakers by running an organization of filmmakers. It became really clear that I was maybe a bit of a dinosaur in terms of looking at media, that the volume of people were really playing games. It was something I hadn't really thought about. So when I started hearing that 300 million people a month are playing games on Facebook, or just these large platforms of people engaging with content on a regular basis, they were easier to find. It meant that you could message to them. And suddenly the idea of transitioning from film, which is sometimes very difficult, to rally around, people around an opening weekend, became a little bit easier to think about in the game space.
But Alden, you work at a film company, and which has had a lot of impact. Would you tell us about some of those campaigns and how you think about film? And even though I know you're more on the side of the distribution channel, would you tell me what your feelings are about film?
Sure. I personally really believe in the power of film, and think that it can do exactly what we talk about, is inspiring people and inspiring change among people. And I think that movies like Lincoln are a great example. It does well at box office. It does well with our social action campaign, which was Stand Tall and Live Like Lincoln, where we created a series of screenings across 8 towns, all named after Lincoln, across the country, and then went into 15 Lincoln high schools across the country. And then over and above that, worked with Disney to distribute 1 copy of the film to each high school, I think it's roughly 32,000 high schools across the country. So when you start to have a film that really tells a message, then people can sort of rally around it and then discuss how Lincoln's legacy lives on today.
But now Lincoln is not necessarily about social change in that we all sort of know who Lincoln is before the movie starts. What about something like Food Inc.?
Food Inc. is an incredible film that has done really well for us, and we've leveraged that for a number of years and leveraged it into some of our other new films, including A Place at the Table, which is about hunger in America. Both are sort of food-related, though separate issues. So Food Inc. is a film that, while there are many people who saw the film, there were actually more people who didn't see the film and yet made changes in their lives. So we did some incredible research with the Norman Lear Center at USC that found that many people who had heard about the film all of a sudden decided to buy organic. And so when you start to aggregate individual people and then groups making those kinds of significant changes, it changes the marketplace, and then it has sort of a bigger impact.
And in that case, the impact is really not about the film itself, it's about the community that got built afterwards.
Correct.
Or at the same time.
Exactly, and we have a community of about 600,000 very active folks on the Food Inc. Facebook page, and who are actively engaged in new petitions and new actions at all times. And I'd like to think that the recent change at Whole Foods, where they are now going to be doing GMO labeling across all of their products, has at least some small part residual effect from Food Inc. and the work there.
How much of that was by design, and how much of it was you realizing you were onto something and just mobilizing a social media campaign super effectively?
For Food Inc., I think it was somewhat by design, but I think that we had no idea how much it would really just take off. And then what we've been doing is really feeding that community on a daily basis with, we have at takepart.com about 11,000 pieces of content a year, many of which are in the food vertical, and we have petitions and new programs and things every day. So we are very active in the management of that, and realize that that needs to be fed in order to sort of continue to activate it.
So Sean, does that, how do you think about tactics? Because here's 2 different sets of tactics. What kind of tactics, how do you think about tactics when you start with a corporation?
Well, when I hear this story, I hear the exception to the rule, frankly, in a company that's able to mobilize to see that the original piece of content you hope was going to be the anchor of the film, maybe isn't going to be the anchor, and all of a sudden the social media piece starts really catching fire. And there's a gap between, I think, particularly this nonprofit sector, of appetite and desire and being able to engage in tactics. So everyone wants to be in this space, and everyone wants to leverage the magic of social media, but the ability to actually get something started and to think in these sort of new format ways, whether it's a filmmaker thinking about, not a filmmaker, but someone who champions film, thinking about gaming, or whether it's a filmmaker thinking about, oh wow, we've got a social media campaign now, and to pivot on that, it's difficult for these institutions to pivot right now.
Is that a function of nonprofits versus corporations, or do corporations suffer some of the same sorts of
across
problems?
the board. I think it's across the board. I think it's generational, largely. I think the bigger the organization, the greater bureaucracies, and there's issues of ownership, and a lot of infighting, and a lot of politically minded people within these organizations who are having turf wars and preventing stuff from getting done.
So Ben, you started with a magazine, and now you're stewarding a community. So what was the reason that you went from that sort of media to what you're doing now?
I felt that, towards the end of last year, we were reaching about 4 million people across the website, the print magazine, and social media. And I felt that we didn't particularly matter from a mission standpoint. That when we started in 2006, we mattered in that we were rebranding good to be more pragmatic, more powerful, more sexy, move away from good equals sacrifice to good equals living an integrated life. And felt that there was a new mission to pursue, which was creating some team of people who share this interest. Because I'm really big into values-based teams. I'm really impressed with the Christian right. I'm really impressed with the Muslim Brotherhood. I'm really impressed with any community that's organized at a primary value set that is beneath any particular issue. The Christian right, is as relevant when it comes to abortion as they are when it comes to marriage, when it comes to education. And yet I feel in the progress space we're very siloed. There's the education community, the ocean community, the transportation community, and I think too consistently we aren't able to move the needle when it comes to these siloed communities. And so I wanted to create a community at a unified basis. And I think through media we'd built a brand that could be a beacon for like minds, and now we had to create the platforms that would allow those like minds to actually be a team. And that was the hustle.
Some of your original thinking on, as soccer was a way that people around the world collaborated, right? Has some of that thinking continued down to where you are now today?
I mean, I think Jesse and I first met when I was trying to make a documentary, which I made with terrible failure, around using soccer as a way to look at kind of a common denominator across culture. But I think the idea of common denominators is where that's relevant, and I think we've arrived at a common denominator, which is pragmatic idealism, creative engagement, and that's the denominator of which we now have a decent-sized community coming together and playing together and doing cool stuff together.
And in that case, is measurement less critical, or are you trying, like what, we're all on this panel after changing the world in some significant way, but in a way that's the only thing you can't actually measure. So how do you think about measurement when you
when we relaunched our site to go from just specific media to community, we framed it from where media kind of focused on learn, we built a new site as learn and do. And so when you post something, if you post an article from the New York Times with half the sky, it's something to learn. If you post your Kickstarter project on raise money to help create my game for change, it's something to do. And that way we can see how, we have a few million people who come to the site, we can see how many of them are clicking do, and how many did this action versus that action. And we start to have, one, an accountable metric of the whole community in terms of total actions, but we also have an accountable metric related to you, Jesse Dillon, member, what are you doing? And in a way, if LinkedIn, your LinkedIn profile shows your sort of corporate presence and your Facebook profile shows your social presence, now your good profile shows your civic presence and what you're actually doing and what you're learning.
Is that a...
Pretty compelling, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. But do you feel like there's a set of values that people who collect around good are aligned on, and do you try and
we curate. So if you say, hey, something to do is show up at my white supremacist rally in San Diego, then we notify you and say, this doesn't fit with our values.
Right.
And we have a sort of value statement, which is sort of the golden rule with the caveat of if you didn't know who you were. So do as you would to another if you didn't know who you were.
Right.
What are you doing to get people into the community?
So we're creating, we still have the media arm of the business creating content, which drives probably the majority of the traffic. and then we try to convert those people into members, and then we're trying to create more options for members to pull others in. So we just had our first holiday as a community called Neighbor Day. That was on Saturday, and the idea was meet your neighbors, pretty low bar. But we had, it was crazy how few people at least in our office, knew our neighbors, and that was the catalyst. But we had 2,100 Neighbor Day events happen around the world. And so, all those people pulled their neighbors in, and hopefully those neighbors now were introduced to this good community, and hopefully they'll join, and hopefully, that community goes from, the scale it is now to something bigger.
So what makes a good game? Is it open to any social justice issue? Because you're a nonprofit.
Yeah,
so
we're a nonprofit, and quite honestly, Games for Change had not been a producer of content. Its mission was really to serve as a facilitator between those who, are interested in making games and using games in terms of the power and reach of games, and those who know how to make them, and that we were sort of in the middle, helping, facilitate conversations that don't happen naturally. I mean, my partner, who's a game developer, Asi Barak, he would say that everything, could be made. Any kind of subject. There's no topic that's taboo in terms of a game.
So is it a values-based organization? Are you only going to work on, if the white supremacist comes to you for a game, are you going to make it?
I think it's fair to say that if the white supremacist comes to me,
over lunch.
It's a real testament to your capabilities.
Yeah.
I'm not that good.
Yeah.
I think that would be shut down.
Yeah.
Everyone can be persuaded.
Yeah.
Alden, how do you guys think about what makes a good movie? What subjects are out there to be made movies of? Anything, or is it?
Well, there's certainly some metrics, some values-based metrics, but I think we always start with a piece of entertainment that's compelling as entertainment. And so it has to be entertainment first and then social action second. And so, we have to really create things that people want to see and that they could be inspired by. And then as we start to, in that development process, that's when we start to really get into what are the themes, what are the potential touch points and leverage points that we can use with some of these films.
So is that 2 meetings, or is that 1 meeting where you say, okay, we're going to do this movie, and then we start to think about tactics? When you talk about pressure points, are those different tactics? Is the campaign for Lincoln the same as for Food Inc.? Is the same as?
They're always different.
Right.
So yeah, we really need to sort of look at the film and so many factors, what's going on in the marketplace, what the NGOs are that are working on the space, what's at a tipping point. Mm-hmm. But when we greenlight films, we do so with social action in mind. So we have to, essentially my department has to say, yep, we think that this is something that we can really leverage people and get people around and get a community around. Is
the measurement different all the time, or is it that you just get 100,000 people, that's been a success?
No, it is different every time. We are actually in the process of starting our own participant index, which is an impact index for media, so cross media. And really, it looks at three main things. One is personal interest. So I gave you that example of Food Inc. And so that personal behavior change of buying organic, that's a personal interest. Shared interest, the community, getting people out in the community and sharing pieces of content like our Lock It Down America for our snitch video. And then there's public interest. So that's when we look at really policy changes and things that we're trying to cultivate with, for example, the hunger in America.
So a lot of those are intangible, right? Some of those can be intangible after a certain point, or is everything stressed on measurement?
Well, I mean, it's really got to be a combination of qualitative and quantitative. So, right. The stories that we hear back from people either via Facebook or phone calls and emails are really part of what continues to drive us, and we know when we're doing well in the marketplace when that happens.
But I think you also got to give them the credit for sort of like macro landscape bombing, in the sense of like, you have the specific action campaigns that you guys run around the films, but they shift whether it's Inconvenient Truth or Waiting for Superman, those fundamentally shifted the landscape upon which the rest of us operate. And so if you are an ed reformer, the environment that you experienced from a funding standpoint, from a policy standpoint, was different post Davis's film than pre, independent of what metrics you're able to pull. And so it's interesting to think about how you'd measure the landscape environment pre your project and post your project.
Right.
That's very difficult from a analytics standpoint, though, yeah, because I mean, I don't think measurement is everything, but I think people are obsessed with it. So
we're all measurement junkies right now.
well, yeah, I mean, but the thing is when you're talking about whether people are going to eat good food or not, that is the ultimate change that you want to make, and that isn't measured. All the things around it are measured. So, like in the context of a corporation, or you have to do much more content than the rest of us, right, Sean? Because you're ongoing these campaigns for a long period of time. So, do you have to measure every morning and then react?
I think we measure in broader strokes. I mean, I'm much more interested in these smaller moments. And there's a great quote from a Facebook chief designer, Patty, who talks about relationships are built over many lightweight interactions over time. And I'm much more interested in that space because we're all addicted to really big ideas. And we're all in this very much this sort of campaign mentality. But these moments, how do we fill these voids that happen in between these campaigns with conversational pieces. And those conversational pieces are, on some level, difficult to measure outside the obvious of likes and shares and comments. But they're important to keep relevance and to keep brand awareness alive and to prove that an organization is really interested in building relationships as much as they are in building awareness for a product or a campaign, however noble it may be.
Michelle, you're making a game. You put
Right.
the game out. Are you continuing to think about updating the message every week and give different are you actively engaged in it, or is it just the game comes out and that's the end of it?
No, so what's been interesting, both a positive and a negative, is that when you launch something on a social platform, it means that it's a service. So it's not like it's a finished product and you just push it out and there's your marketing budget and it's all gone and people either love it or not. We had a budget, just for full disclosure, of $50,000 to market this game, which is basically nothing. And if you're releasing something on Facebook, what we learned is that, or heard from everybody who'd ever done this, is that you only advertise on Facebook. You don't go, the conversion from Twitter or email, while those are good, the real conversion is from people within the platform itself. So for us, we've now reached a point where people have finished playing the game, and they're posting on the Facebook page, they're sending us emails saying, we want more. Are there more levels? Are there more this? Are there more that? And the reality is we only had enough budget to create a certain amount of content for this game to run a certain amount of time. And if you're a power player, you're going to kind of blow through it. And until we have more funding, can't make a commitment to suddenly, these additional ongoing content for the game.
So Are you going to crowdsource more funding? Have you thought about that?
It's a little complicated. So we've talked. I had a conversation with Yancey at Kickstarter early on about trying to crowdsource, because there is a Half the Sky foundation. We're really not raising money publicly under the Half the Sky movement. We're trying not to confuse things. So we've got our own sort of reason why we're not.
So Ben, we've heard a lot of different descriptions of content. You have a platform. Do you have a hierarchy of things that work on your platform that are besides the magazine? Like you say, people are recommending things. What are people really responding to on the platform?
It all depends. I mean, I think there's stuff that is emotionally relevant, stuff that's viscerally relevant, stuff that's intellectually relevant, stuff that's all three. Obviously travels better than any one thing. As far as what, when we create content, it's usually towards the end of getting someone to do something. So we created lots of content around social capital and Robert Putnam's theories around, why neighboring matters to get people to sign up to host a Neighbor Day event. And that's, we are now using our content towards a particular outcome.
Is the voice have to be authentic for people to respond? Is the voice of content important?
What do you? I mean, it's a leading question.
Yeah. Well, is it important? Because at least from my point of view, I see things. You could take people's Twitters for example. Like you can read some things where you feel real connection, the other ones you feel no connection.
Yeah, I think the voice is totally important, both from the individual author and how they use their individual voice, as well as the voice of the entity that's putting it out. And so Good has a certain voice that's kind of about aggressive optimism, but then each of the writers on our team has their own individual voice.
Sean, you have to be the voice of so many different organizations. So how hard is it to get the authentic voice of an organization? Is there a difference between a nonprofit and a for-profit, and how do you think about that when you're thinking about brands?
Getting a voice is easy for anyone who creates content, film, TV, etc. That's what you do for a living. You find voices and you sustain those voices and create credibility and authenticity. The difficulty that comes in, again, brands, whether they are nonprofit brands or for-profit brands, adopting a voice for themselves and understanding what their voice can be in this space and getting out of their own way. But I think the bigger issue for a lot of them is getting involved in a two-way conversation. For years, everyone's been used to having this one-way communication flow. It's been a push society, and now it's push and pull, and brands getting in the mud with their community, as I'm sure Ben can attest, is a tricky proposition for a lot of brands. So
even for just for nonprofits, trying to get them to understand the different issues of what you're trying to do is just as confounding as for a Target. No.
I think more so in some respects, because nonprofits, I think in general, are behind the curve in a lot of ways from for-profit businesses. There's always this talk of nonprofits thinking more like for-profit businesses and adopting more of the sort of attitudes and systems that exist within for-profit companies. And then you have funding issues, $50,000 to launch a game, just the entrenchment, the sort of in the trench mentality of just putting one foot in front of the other day to day. These are not, for the most part, well-funded organizations. And then in the mix of all that, to say, okay, now we're going to talk about how we're going to engage with an audience on Facebook or Twitter. It's sort of a mind-blowing proposition.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I think one thing that we have an agency that helps companies, execute in this space also, and I think one thing that we found there is just like the hurdle that needs to happen to take the risk of having the two-way thing, of just being like, you know what, we're going to open it up and people are going to say, fuck GE. And I think it's cool to see some companies say, all right, great, let's have that. They're going to say that regardless of whether we open it up or not. But at least now we're able to have a back and forth.
And that's part of the authenticity, right? I mean, the authenticity is the voice in which you create your own content. The authenticity is also the degree to which you are engaging with the community in a honest way and taking and not shutting stuff down and being a community manager in every sense of the word.
I have a quick question that's for Alden about, you mentioned partnerships. Can you talk a little bit about how you select your NGO partners and numbers and what you expect from them?
Sure, it's a little bit different every time, but for the most part, in some of our films and our campaigns, we try and be really selective. Like we had two main partners for our Snitch campaign. One was really the campaign for fair sentencing for youth, around that sort of vertical of our campaign, and then Families Against Mandatory Minimums, and that is sort of a separate vertical around the campaign. So we had a two-pronged strategy there. But for our film, A Place at the Table, we have 30-plus organizations that are involved with the overall campaign, and then we've created the first of its kind National Action Center, and there are over 100 organizations that are delivering actions to that action center. And so, it depends each time as to what we're really looking for. We're always looking for people to really raise awareness about the issue, raise awareness about the film, because for us, at least on the documentary side, it's not really about making money, it's about sort of driving awareness, and so people have to go to that opening weekend in order, so it's really about sort of getting those butts in seats, but so that they can be inspired and then take action from there. So,
are you giving them content, these partners, for them to publish to their own platforms?
To some extent, so scenes from the film and things like that, yes. And then certainly we do infographics and other sort of supplemental content. We try and do a lot of content through our Take Part platform to do articles about the different NGOs and the work that they're doing. And then with some of our campaign partners, so for example, Campaign Fair Sentencing for Youth, to help develop a media kit for them. So we literally brought in some of the folks who were once sentenced to life without parole, but through sort of a switch, were able to get out and are really reestablishing their lives. And we created these videos, including one about a young man named Xavier out of Chicago, and it's gotten 40,000 views, and people are just totally moved by it. And it was initially created for advocacy tools, and it's really become sort of a popular video. So it's another entryway point. So lots of different things, but it's really about sort of raising awareness, and we really look at who are the experts in the space, who are the people who know the most about it and are making the biggest impact.
And do you ask them about their bandwidth to take on being part of your campaign?
Absolutely, yeah. Most of the time it works out great, and some of the time less great. But I think that we've sort of established a lot of success over the years with that.
How many campaigns are you running at one time?
For film, we're running about 7 campaigns right now. So we're keeping things quite busy. But then in addition, we have what's going on through Take Part and our Take Action button. And so from a digital perspective, we are ongoing, and those are sort of smaller level campaigns.
So how many people does it require to keep all those things going?
From a social action perspective, our team is about 15 or so. There's 5 on film and 5 on television, which is sort of up and running because we're launching August 1st, our TV network, and then about 3 or 4 and 5 on digital.
What would you consider the Food Inc. community now? Is that an ongoing film campaign, or is that just a digital campaign? I mean, because it's kind of the movie's long gone, but
we
the
call
community...
it a legacy campaign, and so very much the film is still relevant, and we continue to sort of feed different elements of the film and bring folks back who were featured in the film and have sort of where are they now's kind of, and either whether it be a Twitter chat or an actual film piece. For example, a smaller film that we did, Pressure Cooker, we are actually in the process right now of doing a Where Are They Now 5 years later, these graduates of the CCAP program in New York. And so I think it's really a legacy campaign, and so it kind of splits both ways between digital and film.
So Michelle, you have done games in Kenya and India, and I think the Facebook game is most popular in a different country.
Right, Turkey.
In Turkey.
Yeah.
So are there cultural issues with making games and delivering them around the world?
Excuse me. There are definitely cultural issues. I mean, when we're looking at the Facebook game, because, I mean, strangely enough, people don't necessarily think of, when anything goes on the internet, that means that anybody anywhere can see it and consume it. So some of the challenges, we worked with I was asking about your partners, because we relied on our partners, and there's 7 of them, for the Facebook game. We relied on them from everything from content to helping us get their community out and know that the game was launching, and to also give it this, when you think about it, women's oppression, sexual health issues, all this stuff is pretty difficult. And to think of it being on a game, it meant we really needed to have our NGO partners prepared and confident that they were going to feel good, that we were going to trivialize these issues.
Now, did you target Turkey, or did you?
No. Yes. So back to this $50,000 ad spend. We had $50,000 to spend on advertising. Our partner, we had a great strategic partnership with Zynga.org, where basically they helped us in co-promoting our game across their various platforms on their Z-Bar, across their games. And they also helped manage our ad spend. So you can buy the way, sort of consuming, if you will, viewers, whether it's, butts in seats for theater, opening weekend, or it's players on a website to play a Facebook game, you're buying advertising. So, let's say 10,000 people a day are coming into your game because you're a featured game on the Facebook platform. When we started spending money on advertising, it was actually a wiser spend for us in certain countries over, say, the US. So that would help us build up the sort of critical mass, get people talking about the game, experiencing the game, playing the game, and it also led to this really kind of interesting dynamic of people writing in and posting on the Facebook page, hey, thanks, the game takes place in US, Afghanistan, India, Kenya, and the US. So we included the US as one of the countries with these challenges around women and girls.
But with it taking off in Turkey, were there things that were about Turkey in the game?
There aren't things about Turkey, but there are things about India.
Mm-hmm.
So in India, where we ran into some challenges before launch that we were able to deal with, things like our main character, her eyes are green. So how many Indian women have green eyes? So there's issues around sort of representation.
Did you modify the game in India?
We did not modify. The game is the same everywhere. The only thing that's been modified is the game is in French now as well.
Did you have local partners in India?
Yeah, so we did.
And
so
the
local partners,
what was that process like?
They led to, I'd say...
Like, did you meet in New York and sit down and talk about it?
No, it was all over Skype. So it was and you know, don't forget Nick and Cheryl were also filming in India, so Half the Sky was part, you know, it was a documentary. So there were a number of partners of NGOs on the ground in India. But basically it was things like the name, a mother would never relate to her children in this way. So it's an adventure story, so it's about the script. So is it, you know, what are the characters called? What does the veil look like on the woman in Afghanistan? It would never look this way. It needs to look like this. So really kind of specific character details and story details, just as you would probably in a film.
You know, is that with your community, Ben, do you have a representation around the world? Are there people from all over the world?
Yeah, you know, when we were a media company, it was about 80% coming from US from a traffic standpoint and 20% globally. And then now that we've opened it up to a community, it's probably closer to 50-50 between domestic members and international members.
And the international members, do you account for them differently? Do you talk to them differently? Do you make different content for them?
No, I mean, but since people are now able to put their own content in the environment, you know, they're putting stuff in specific to where they're from. But we have...
and does that get shared over the entire network?
Yeah, based on meritocracy of whether people think it's good or not.
I saw what you did there. The good thing, you just mentioned the good thing. It's good.
I keep coming back to it.
Yeah.
But we start, you know, when we started, we announced the local chapters a few months ago. We said, would anyone want, you know, an unpaid job running a local chapter? You have to meet, you know, bring your community together once a month and, you know, learn, do, and celebrate around a theme that month. And we had, you know, about 2,400 people apply. And the majority of them were from overseas, which was amazing to me. And so now we've got chapters starting in all the continents except Antarctic.
And do you ever bring them together online? Or do you have forums?
So we do Google Hangouts with all the local leads.
And do you go to those? Are they interesting?
It's awesome. It's totally awesome. If you want to meet cool people doing cool things, it's a great place to go.
I'm curious about the Turkey and where you're getting
Where players are coming from?
yeah, well, and how that jives with sort of the mission, right? And where the organization is strongest. So you know, you get people using the game in Turkey, but do you sort of readjust where your efforts are going in Israel?
So interestingly, before the game launched, one of the things that we were talking about is, you know, because it's a game, you have the ability to have all these stats and metrics on the back end in terms of who's playing, how old are they, all this sort of stuff. And there were some certain assumptions we had going in that the majority of players were going to be women. We assumed because there's a way that you can, at the end of each quest, and just directly donate to any of our NGO partners through the game itself, which was a complicated model for us to set up. So we just assumed that was going to really appeal to kind of a U.S. audience, and that we're probably going to go after, you know, kind of a Western audience, if you will. The reality was we couldn't really, I don't know that the game was necessarily sticky enough for a U.S. audience to spread in that certain way. So we quickly decided it made sense to get the volume of players and where are people interested in playing this game and how do we reach them. So we decided to just go for where we could.
And so how does that stay on target for the underlying values of the actual organization?
So the values of the organization for the game were really about how do we take this message to those who are not necessarily engaged in these issues. That hasn't changed. The thing that I think changed was the desire for this to be a fundraising vehicle, primarily a fundraising vehicle.
That got scrapped?
No, it didn't get scrapped at all. So we've raised, I think in total there's something like $200,000, you know, in total monies that have, you know, gone to these NGOs.
Right.
So I think that's great. We're happy about that. But it's not, you know, that's probably not the primary driver at the moment. It's really about how do we get more and more people to play.
Is that a demonstration of the model in a way that you think is a scalable idea?
I think some things have changed in terms of when we started out with this idea of going to Facebook to now where Facebook is right now as a platform. So some of the things that would have made being viral a little bit easier, sharing out posts in a very simple way, that stuff has changed for privacy reasons on the Facebook platform. So basically this is a platform that you don't control its rules. You know, so as the game is being built, you know, things sometimes shift and change.
So Alden, how do you select platforms that you're going to be on? Are you going to be on every platform? Are you going to be on a few platforms at the beginning of the campaign?
You mean digital platforms?
Yeah.
Yeah, we play in the space of Facebook and Twitter. You know, I think that our Take Part colleagues do a little bit more work in Pinterest and some of the other, and Instagram and some of the other platforms, but I think that we found the most success on Facebook and Twitter to create different kinds of conversations. So some lend themselves a little bit better to the other.
It's really knowing your audience, right? I mean,
Yeah.
platforms are driven primarily by
Right.
how is your audience going to engage and what platforms they're used to.
What
being around.
when you're making a movie about nuclear proliferation and you're want to de-escalate tensions in Pakistan, how do you target that to Pakistan, or do you?
I think that that's an example of some of the films that we do that really we target the grass tops. So it's not necessarily about the most people seeing the film. It's really about being in the right place. And so, for example, last year we took Countdown to Zero to a small group of Russian Federation folks. And so conversations like that are probably more impactful for that kind of, for that theme and for that social impact agenda.
Social influencers.
So, Sean, how do you deal with global issues? Do you have to take your corporations around the world?
We're primarily U.S. based. We're doing a increasingly large amount of work in Europe right now, where there's still dollars available, and it's not too many places. But so localization of content's becoming more of an issue. I think there's certain topics and certain subject matter and certain voices that can carry globally.
So
for us.
do you look for local partners? Or
Always. Yeah.
So if you're working in Europe, you try and find some.
Always. The work is managed more or less from the U.S. unless there's time constraints that make that time delay too untenable. But the work itself is getting created locally.
How often are you putting new content out? When you get in business with a brand, how often are you putting new content out?
Daily, multiple times a day.
Yeah. So does anybody have any questions of the panel? No questions.
Wow.
Nailed it.
Answered
Okay,
every
what do you
question.
got?
I'm a feature film producer, so if I have content that I feel that is type of your qualities, how do you guys pretty much decide what films you're going to use or not to take on?
Well, we have a whole green lighting process. So, essentially, if it's a documentary, it would go through our docs department, or a narrative through our narrative department, and they do an evaluation, make sure, as I said, sort of that the entertainment part is there, and then for those that are selected, it gets sort of sent out to the broader group to sort of evaluate and make sure that it can fit the other criteria that we have.
So it's really about the mission first, and then the expression of the idea second. And you guys develop most of your material, unless it's Steven Spielberg, in-house, correct?
We're actually increasing our internal development, but we do a lot of partnerships with other projects that have already been sort of picked up by other organizations.
When scripts come in, are you a part of that process where you say, well, hey, I don't think any audience that won't reach an audience?
Yeah, I'm part of the green lighting group. I look at the green lighting docs and do the sort of write-up for social action.
Great. Any other questions, you guys? Well, so.
Jesse?
Yes.
Can you talk to us about your organization?
Sure. Wonders helps people tell complex stories. Like I said, we, kind of a little frazzled right now, so I can't really describe it very well. But usually for places like George Soros or Clinton Global Initiative, we'll help them explain what they're trying to do, and then do some variation on what all these guys are doing in a different way, that kind of thing. Well, what else? What do you got?
What's the inspiration for doing it?
I think me and my buddies were frustrated that coming out of school, media wasn't accurately representing our generation. That there was this idea, if you want to do good, go to the Peace Corps. And if you don't want to go to the Peace Corps, go to Goldman Sachs. And I'm not kidding. And I feel like we were like, that is totally way off the mark. There's all these people who are doing awesome things somewhere in the middle, living an integrated life, making money, doing good, making money. And we wanted to reflect that accurately. And I think Wired was the analog. If they helped reflect the emergence of technology from where when I was a kid it was sort of nerdy and esoteric to where now it's fully permeated society, we wanted to do that for living an engaged life. And move it from the esoteric Peace Corps opportunity to a part of everyone's life and a part of society.
Is it non-profit?
That's for profit.
That's the business.
So we sell ads. We figure out ways to make money. We hustle hard.
And sorry. Do you feel like this is a trend that's just getting started and has a pretty significant bandwidth to go? I feel like the people in this room know about it, but I feel like there's a lot of the mainstream world that still has no idea.
I think we've crossed the tipping point.
Yeah.
Actually, I think, from Arab Spring leading to Occupy, leading to the SOPO movement, felt like that to me was one of those, like, I think the '08 election of Obama domestically felt like there was a real watershed for people who give a damn getting involved, like, and kind of coming out of their house. And then I felt that year when all those international events popped off, it really made me feel like we'd turned the point and giving a damn had become a kind of dominant component of society. But my frustration was feeling like it was lots of spikes without any sort of a foundational base that could capture the energy. So you didn't have to muster it all each time to build a community from scratch.
To add on to that, actually, we did some research when we were developing our Take Action button, and we found that 54% of people want to be engaged more in doing good, so or sort of in social action. And so I think that it has hit that tipping point. I think that there are more and more companies, and when you start to get brands involved, then it starts to sort of balloon in a different way. But I do think that there's a real appetite out there, and people want to know how to do things. And so that's why we've actually continued to develop and created our sort of other platforms.
Do you think that's part of a larger trend whereby the general population, maybe around the world, and certainly in the Western world, don't believe in the governmental structures that exist and want to take control of themselves and make a difference themselves?
I mean, individuals?
Absolutely. So they say,
Well,
this is my pound, and I'm going to give this £1 to this one person, and I'm going to say exactly how to be spent and how I'm going to make it.
I think for sure you're seeing a sort of decentralization of authority and an increase in efficacy of the individual, where people feel like they can move the needle. And in terms of like the shift happening,
Well, and they have. I mean, they've moved. There have never been more people on the earth than there are now doing good things. So.
And just cool platforms allow those people to add value to each other directly. And I also think that the problems that we already have and the problems that are on the horizon are super significant. And so the idea that this being a trend or a fad is impossible, because the sea is rising. Like it's kind of like a wonderfully biblical fact. And so I just think that this idea of being engaged and responding to the challenges is just, it's only going to increase.
And consumer habits are changing too. I mean, just in the same way that people are getting used to finding the best bargain online for the best, T-shirt. People are getting a lot smarter about how they want to put their dollar, where they want to put their dollar in. And so it's relatively easy to find the cause that best matches your couch, and make the right donation you want.
And it's the transparency. People want to know where their money's going.
Although the
from all of these
complexity of that
organizations.
is that, our understanding of reality is imperfect. And so the way that we engage our money, I was in Mozambique not long ago with one group I won't name, but we were at a water project that was being built there with a lot of nonprofits from the United States that if I had seen them here, I would have wanted to work for them all. But when I sat in the meeting, I knew that water project was never going to get built. So the question becomes, you can't, it's not necessarily predictable. The point is to do good things, but you can't. A lot of times philanthropy can go in the wrong direction. It hurts as much as it helps. It's a complicated thing.
And I'd say that it's really an emergence of the individual, but also that people continue to rely on government for certain things. I don't think it's a sort of a full stop on the government. I think that it's really about communities, organizations, companies, and government all coming together to fix these problems. And that's where you're seeing, I think, the most positive outcomes.
Hey, Ben, I got a question. How would you rate Obama for America's chances at breaking down this siloed effect that you talked about on the left?
To be honest, I think I'm a big fan of his efforts and that effort, but I think the problem with it is that it's built around him, and there's no way that you can aggregate that strength and execute all the efforts within the window where he's the lead. So the fact that it's even, like, I think it needs to be built around something underneath any issue or any individual, and that's my only concern for Organizing for America.
Although in general, it kind of marches forward in a good way. I mean, 100 years ago, we'd be talking about colonialism or we'd be talking about, missionaries. Now we talk about philanthropy almost in the same way, and the danger is that there's a certain blindness in that, is that you have to be aware of what you're trying to do. Some things can be affected really well, and other ones are more complicated, but the point is to just be in the battle every day because you want to see things get better.
I have just a quick question for all. How do we find your stuff? You mentioned a movie that you produced that was, the intent was to show how someone who was wrongfully jailed, for example, and how he got out. I'd like to find that movie. How would I do that?
Go to takepart.com. Take Part. T-A-K-E, part.com. I'm selling. And in that case, that's Xavier's story. You go to takepart.com/snitch, which is our recent film with Dwayne Johnson, and it's on one of those tabs. Yeah. Then all of our films are featured through Take Part, so we have film pages and in addition to our verticals of just general content.
Okay, any other questions? Where do you go?
Let's come back to Sean. You made a comment, and I'm maybe paraphrasing you here, but you talked about Facebook as a way of incremental action, deepening engagement earlier on, and a way of building engagement. I lead an organization that, among other things, is looking to build a global social movement around slavery, trafficking efforts to avoid, with a strong focus on Facebook membership and focus on email. And very early stages, but my understanding is that in this space, email is regarded as the kind of gold standard of means of engaging, whereas Facebook is a fairly new and untested tool. I happen to think, though, that with Facebook, if you have an engaged community, there is this ability to kind of constantly educate your membership, perhaps in a way that you can't do through email. But I just wondered if you've given some thoughts on that, given your earlier comments.
I mean, email is a bit. This is quickly becoming, I think, antiquated. I mean, it's still a powerful direct mail tool, but in terms of reaching a new audience, you could argue that you could use Facebook and other social media platforms to broaden your email list and therefore be able to have a different kind of conversation with that already converted audience. But if you're looking to convert new people, being relevant and in their lives, it's sort of constant drumbeat, hopefully not too loud and too pounding on the eardrum of information that's useful, that's entertaining, that's engaging, that's shareable. I don't know. Facebook is the number one place to do that. I mean, there's other emerging platforms that clearly are powerful as well. Good being one of them.
I wouldn't actually say that's the platform is unimportant in that problem. The issue with that problem is trying to get people to understand what slavery means outside of the United States, because it has a very different meaning than it does here. So you have a conceptual problem at the very beginning about how you're going to approach that issue in a way that it could be meaningful, and you'd have to find ways, once you had the idea clear, to create places where people might come across it and find it and then engage in it, because it's ultimately a values issue. And values, once you codify them and put them in a thing, they're no longer any good, because once you understand every single thing about them, they're no longer a living thing. But that's a very thorny issue. So, in a case like that, like, the strong thing to do would be to pick one place where it was occurring and apply pressure to fix a specific thing, because slavery is such a huge issue around the world that it's so big people can't understand it. So you have to say, well, okay, in this place where they're doing tobacco farmers and that slavery's existed for 50 generations, we're going to unpile it here. That's a metaphor that people can believe in.
I think the common thread you're hearing from everyone is story first. Right? I mean, it all begins with the story, and then.
How do you translate that? I mean, it's sort of then, but into beyond collectivism, into action and build a community around it beyond the awareness raising? Is it running individual campaigns? Is it?
I mean, I think it's a vision of success, and then working backwards in pieces, because I think people get turned on with a potential outcome, and then they can do work in the short term to start taking steps there if there's a feedback loop that says, hey, we're making progress. Let's continue being excited about that vision, and let's be pumped about what we achieve.
It's also it's counterintuitive, but decentralized control means not actually telling people what to do. It means giving them options of things that they could do, but like when you talk about SOPA or PIPA, you know, these things were great because all these different organizations, even though in the end I'm not sure it was that effective because we stopped one thing during a campaign year, and you know, but when it was effective because all these different organizations took different actions, in which case it overwhelmed policymakers because they couldn't see which direction it was coming from. And the best, you really see that clearly with a lot of the internet campaigns, because internet, you know, especially on internet neutrality, before it was kind of co-opted, those were the most effective campaigns because they were decentralized. Maybe in Egypt you see that, maybe in Barack's election, everybody worked for Barack, but there wasn't like a overall, he didn't win because he had a great website, you know. So.
Partnerships.
Yeah, it's also getting involved in things that might seem a little bit outside of the norm. So for instance, one of our partners on the game, Half the Sky, is GEMS. And it took a lot of convincing, you know, for them to feel comfortable with, we couldn't even use the term a game because it had a very specific connotation for that organization. So it's really identifying where there might be opportunities to be part of a larger movement or discover new people who might be sensitive to some of the issues that you're talking about. And I agree with Jesse about breaking it down into some specific actions and language around what do you mean by slavery.
And, you know, in the end, you have to ask people. People always forget this. It sounds really stupid, but you have to actually say, would you please be a part of this? It would help me. That's that voice that I think really, like a lot of the organizations I work with, you know, the voice is where you start. You know, you have to ask people to participate or they won't.
I have a quick question in regards to funding. Maybe there's a success story up there. On the other side, institutions and businesses and banks and insurance companies, there's a lot of talk right now about cause marketing. And I wonder if there's any stories up there, a success story where you actually go to an institution and you start with the mission, and then you convince them to partner with you for cause marketing.
So cause marketing, I'll just comment on this. You know, cause marketing is not a great thing. Usually that, you know, it's usually a company trying to do something to get credit for doing something, right? So when you want real pro-social business innovation, you want them to do it core to their fundamental mission. And that's what we as the public should reward corporations for doing. You know, BP had great cause marketing. They built playgrounds for children. They were wonderful. You know, they built, you know, they cut a hole in the bottom of the ocean, which who even knew it was possible, you know? So I think you have to be careful about that. But that said, they are able to do good stuff. Does anybody have a quick comment on that? Because we don't have much time.
And I'm sure we both have experiences on, I mean, all of us probably do. I think there's a lot of awesome people who work at big companies who mean really well and are working really hard to try to align the assets of their companies with the values that they carry. And I think finding those people and then figuring out how to do something that benefits their P&L, because if it doesn't benefit their P&L, it's not going to last, and then figuring out where the overlap between that is and social impact.
And very few of those are built for the long haul. So, you know, making a differentiation between when is a quick win going to benefit the organization, and when do you actually want a partner who's going to stick with you for the long haul.
Okay, so thank you to the panelists, and I think we're going to, for anybody who wants to stay, we're going to have there's going to be you're going to demonstrate, they're going to demo the game. There you go. Okay.
And thank you, Jesse.
Yeah, oh, thanks. Yeah.
Bye.